Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. I'm Dr. Pebbles Turbyville, the CEO of Horses and Humans Research Foundation, and we are here to do education as well as fun research for horses' well-being as well as horses and humans connection. And we're real excited tonight about our topic. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen Cho, our education co-chair and board member, so she can introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Pebbles. I'm so honored to introduce Jill. I didn't ask you how to pronounce your last name, Jill.
Tobia.
Tobia. I had the privilege of meeting Jill on two separate occasions when I led a natural lifemanship training out in California at the Wild Horse Sanctuary. And the work that she does is just incredible. So she is the former executive director and current vice president of the nonprofit Wild Horse Sanctuary in Northern California, as well as a senior marketing manager for California's Health Benefit Exchange. And she says she's been in awe of wild horses since childhood and a wild horse advocate since 2007 when she began volunteering at the sanctuary. And some of her responsibilities include strategic planning, public and donor relations, and leading trail rides and wild horse walking tours. And you are in for such a treat today. She's going to talk about the history of wild horses on U.S. public land, what is happening on public land today, and the role that Wild Horse Sanctuary plays in protecting and preserving America's wild horses as a living national treasure. And when she talks about this subject, she has so much passion and heart, and I know all of you will really be excited about what she's going to share today.
Thank you so much. And it's so nice to see you all. I really appreciate being here. I love talking about horses, all kinds of horses, but wild horses in particular. And my absolute favorite nonprofit sanctuary is the Wild Horse Sanctuary, which was established in 1978. We are the first wild horse sanctuary in the US to have been established in the United States. And I'd like to start out a little bit with the history of wild horses on public lands. And so I'm going to move to my next slide. I was surprised to learn that how many people are unaware that wild horses even exist on public lands in the US. And I understand why. Most of them have been in the Western states. Things are changing now where some are being moved to other locations throughout the country, but for quite a long time, most wild horses lived in the Western US. And today, the Bureau of Land Management, which is a part of the Department of the Interior, oversees 173 herd management areas in 11 Western states. And the states are listed here. The largest population of wild horses are in Nevada, California, and New Mexico and Arizona come in close to each other, but Nevada definitely has the majority of the wild horses. And I actually gave a similar presentation last August to a local group, and at the time, the Bureau of Land Management managed 175 HMAs in the 11 Western states. And what that means is two of the herd management areas they no longer exist because wild horses have been removed from those areas. They've been zeroed out and they're no longer horses on that land, which we'll talk a little more about as we move along. So in the early years, there were no laws specific to wild horses. Anybody could round them up, could kill them, for any particular purpose. There were people who actually were known as Mustangers, and they used any means necessary or possible to harvest wild horses. And generally that would have been for commercial purposes. They would have been sold to slaughter. And back in those days, slaughter was legal in the United States. And so that's how some people made their money, was through wild horse roundups and selling them. Some people captured wild horses and ultimately used them for their own riding horses, but the vast majority were sent through the slaughter pipeline. In 1950, a woman named Velma Johnston, who ultimately became known as Wild Horse Annie, she was behind a horse trailer on the road and saw blood dripping out of the back of it and inquired as to what was going on and realized that that trailer was full of wild horses in varying states of health, meaning some were all beat up and banged up and they were on their way to slaughter. She felt that was wrong, and she began a grassroots campaign to bring this situation to light and to make an attempt to make some changes for wild horses. One of the biggest parts of her campaign and one of the most successful parts was getting school children to write letters to their elected officials to talk about the value of all life, the value of horses and wild horses in particular. And as that was evolving, more and more newspapers were covering the exploitation of wild horses and burros. And back in the 50s, of course, there's no internet. And so we relied heavily on local newspapers to pick up stories that, in order to convey information, we were relying on newspapers. In 1959, Walter Bering, a congressman, introduced a bill to prohibit the use of motorized vehicles. So that meant no more trucks or motorcycles or anything of that nature to hunt wild horses. And in 1959, that bill was passed into law, and it was informally known as the Wild Horse Annie Act. Did you have a question, Octavia? I should have said, you're welcome to ask questions or make comments at any point during the presentation. I forgot to share that. Okay. Annie's original intent was that there be some, and Annie, aka Velma's original intent was to have legislation that actually protected and managed wild horses and burros. That was not part of the law in 1959. As time went on, Wild Horse Annie continued her advocacy efforts for wild horses and burros. Other people were getting more and more involved. And in 1971, in response to declining numbers of wild horses on public land and public's outcry, and the letter writing continued, Congress did unanimously pass what became known as the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burro Act. And that was signed into law by President Nixon in 1971. At that point in time, both the U.S. Departments of Interior and Agriculture oversaw the wild horse program. It was in its infancy, this management and protection of wild horses project. And there were a lot of kinks to work out and a lot of things to be understood, and eventually transitioned to where currently the U.S. Department of Interior, the Bureau of Land Management, which I'll refer to as BLM for the remainder of the presentation, they currently oversee the program. So the goals of the act in 1971 were to manage, protect, and control the wild horses and burros, make sure they lived in balance with the land and other ecological resources, certainly other species of wildlife, and also it's public land, therefore the public is using it for a variety of purposes, and the goal was to ensure that the horses and burros could just live naturally within the areas where they resided and maintain the ecological balance and people's rights to use the land for other purposes. And then one of the big things was to recognize that wild horses and burros as symbols of the West pioneer spirit and how much horses have contributed to nature's biodiversity. Any questions so far? I probably should have asked, is anyone on this call like a wild horse advocate? You could put it in the chat or you could come off mute. Is anybody familiar with wild horses? Anything, Kathleen?
Nope, I don't see anything in the
Okay,
chat right now.
great. I meant to ask that in the beginning and I overlooked that. So in 1976, there was an amendment slipped into a different bill. It's referred to as the Burns Amendment, and it actually amended the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971, and it allowed for helicopter roundups and motorized vehicles to humanely manage wild horses and burros. And that amendment overwrote, bypassed what was put in place as part of the earlier act, as well as the Wild Horse Annie Act. So, in essence, some of the provisions for managing and caring for and humanely uh, humanely managing and caring for wild horses was revoked. And so today, helicopter roundups of wild horses are routine. They're very costly. The independent contractors generally bid on the government work. They are helicopter contractors. They aren't necessarily horse people, wild horse people. They've got a job to get done, and that's to bring in however many horses have been determined need to be removed from an area. So these herd management areas, the Bureau of Land Management has decided how many horses the land can sustain alongside cows and sheep that are allowed to graze on public lands as well. So they establish a level, and then any horses above that level that they've determined the land can sustain are removed. And this is a very hot political topic for some. My goal is to share with you facts without sprinkling in my personal opinion too much. I will share that my personal opinion is that there are extremists on both sides, and I think that the real truth and the real solutions lie somewhere in the middle. And I see progress happening, but I also know that some people are really get really fired up about this. So I'm trying to share with you what I know to be true, and I cite some sources at the end of the presentation, and which I can share with you so that you know that I've attempted to gather clear factual information for you. Um, they are costly because the contractors are not cheap, and there are animals who die during the roundup. Um, and for whatever reason, so often the roundups are timed in such a way that it's shortly after foals are born. And so you've got, 2 and 3 week old or a few month old horses being run like you see here with this helicopter. The babies frequently don't make it, or they make it into the holding facility so injured that they have to be euthanized at that time. There are groups, by the way, various advocacy groups who are try to be present. The goal would be to have them be present during these roundups so that they can document some information. And also, the goal is for some people of the public to be present as a means of oversight, public oversight, since it's public land. So here's some examples of just kind of what it looks like. I know sometimes I can't watch too many of the videos or look at too many pictures. It does make me sad that horses will, the helicopters fly above and they kind of push the horses out from wherever they might be shaded up, and then they're run in this upper right section here, I don't know if my screen is big enough to show you the photos, but in essence, they are driven toward a trap. And then frequently what they do is they turn loose a domestic horse and have that domestic horse start heading toward the trap. And those horses are referred to as Judas horses. They run in ahead of the wild herd, and then by nature and by instinct, they follow the Judas horse into the trap, and then they quickly release the Judas horse, and then the wild horses are put in pens and then eventually loaded onto trailers and taken to holding facilities, generally a short-term holding facility for processing and documentation and such, and then to longer-term holding. Today, the annual costs for the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro program cost taxpayers over $100 million each year. I did not realize for a very long time that my tax dollars were used for this purpose. And that's something that I just think, we all have our issues that we stand for or that we fight for, and we can't all expend the same amount of energy as everybody else to on every single issue. But I really opened my eyes when I realized that some of my tax dollars went to roundups as well as went to supporting horses in holding facilities. And there are many, many, many horses, 62,000 horses in holding facilities, and many of them live in the conditions that you see here in this photo, which is very similar to like a cattle feedlot situations. Some horses do live in facilities that the government has some programs where larger landowners can apply to have wild horses living on their property, and so the food is subsidized and fencing and such. So there are individuals who have property where horses are living, and they have a much better quality of life. I've seen some of those facilities, and the horses are living pretty naturally and pretty happy. Yes, they've been removed from their homeland, but they're not living in a feedlot type of situation. So there are about 62,000 wild horses and burros off range in various forms of holding facilities. And the cost to care for a horse in holding for its entire life can reach about $50,000 per horse. This fiscal year 2025, the budget for the Wild Horse and Burro program is $142 million, and 2/3 of it approximately goes to caring for the horses that are in holding. The Bureau of Land Management has had an adoption program for wild horses for a very long time, and they've partnered with the Mustang Heritage Foundation in Texas and they do partnered with other organizations too, but the Mustang Heritage Foundation is probably the most widely known, and they're responsible for various competitions, so to speak, where people adopt a Mustang and have a certain number of days, say up to 90 days, to gentle that horse, either get it halter broke or saddle trained. It depends upon what competition, what part of the competition they signed up for. And then those horses are placed, they're adopted from those events. And those events actually happen across the country. So you will find more and more people having Mustangs outside of the Western states. And as I stated, some private landowners have a government contract to allow wild horses to live on their property. And those are outside of the 11 Western states too. So you will find herds of wild horses elsewhere, not to mention the ones that are like the Chincoteague, Assateague horses. I'm not so much referring to those as they are managed by a different group than the Bureau of Land Management. So some horses do go on to live a really amazing domestic life. And It's just that there are so many horses and not as many people available to adopt. And so a number of years ago, probably 6 years ago, the BLM um, put together an incentive program that if you adopted a wild horse over after the first year, you would get $500, and after that, another $500. So people were inspired to adopt. They had $1,000 stipend, so to speak, for adopting. And what ended up happening is a lot of the wild horse advocates were finding these horses turning up in the slaughter pipeline. People would get their money, and then as soon as they were done, then they would sell them to a kill buyer. And so they had their $1,000 plus whatever they got per pound for the horse. And so many were found in slaughter pipeline, like holding, auction yards, that ultimately, with a lot of public pressure and pressure from organizations specifically designed to advocate for wild horses, that program ended. It ended just this year. So some of the wins for wild horses, I mean, I've shared information that's factual, but it feels kind of bleak. There are some positive things happening for the wild horses. The adoption incentive program ended in March of this year. Um, in the Virginia Range area of Nevada, the Wild Horse Fertility Control Program in the last 6 years has reduced the birth rate by 82% by using a sterilization vaccine. It's a fertility control vaccination. Um, they have upwards of 40 trained volunteers to track the horses, administer the vaccine through a dart gun, and then follow up on and document, did those mares that they vaccinated full? And in just the most recent report, as of earlier this month, it's documented that 70% of the mares in the reproductive age range have been vaccinated. It's a 300,000 acre area that these folks manage, and to have reduced the birth rate by 82% is really a significant reduction. And the hope is that these folks, who are primarily backed by the American Wild Horse Conservation effort, can convince the government to implement these types of programs in as many herd management areas as possible, so as to reduce the need or eliminate the need to remove the horses from their home. So the Wild Horse Sanctuary, that is really my passion. Wild horses are my passion, but the sanctuary itself is a place that I just can't even imagine not having in my life after spending so much time there. It was established in 1978. As I said earlier in the conversation, it's the first wild horse sanctuary in the US. Co-founders Jim and Diane Clapp. Diane is Diane Nelson now, but back in 1978, Jim and Diane Clapp, a husband and wife team, were rounding up goats on an island in Southern California when the government approached them and asked if they, and when I say the government at this point, it was the federal government, would they move to Northern California and help trap wild horses in the Modoc National Forest. At the time, the Claps said sure. They were younger, that was their living. They did not fully understand what the fate of those horses might have been. The government indicated that they were going to place the horses for adoption, and that's why they were being rounded up. And in the first year, Jim and Diane and their family members did trap those horses, and all but 12 were adopted, and they felt pretty good about that. The 12 that were not adopted were, Diane shares, one had, a couple were blinded, one was, a few were missing ears, one had a broken leg. And so when they were asked to put those 12 horses down, it made sense to them. Um, the following year, there were 80 horses that didn't get adopted, and most of them in perfect health, and they were asked to put them down. And they said, no, we won't do that. This doesn't make any sense. And so at that point, they decided to adopt the horses themselves. They reached out to other people they knew, landowners, and they found the Carey Ranch, Mr. and Mrs. Carey in Alturas, California, said, we'll house those 80 horses while you find a permanent location for them. So for 2 years, they were in Alturas, California. And then in 1980, when the collapse, they started a nonprofit, raised money, started buying some parcels of land, and moved those first 80 horses to the Wild Horse Sanctuary, which is in Northern California, Shingletown, California, which is near Mount Lassen and Mount Shasta, are probably the two most notable landmarks in that area. What was really cool about that property is that it was very similar to the terrain in the Modoc National Forest. There's a lot of lava rock, a lot of hills, which allows the horses to live healthy lives and be active, and the rocks naturally wore down their hooves so that their hooves could, just wear naturally. Um, any questions or comments so far? I feel like I thought I should come up for air for a moment.
This is great, Jill. We're all learning so much. So
Okay,
please feel free to
wonderful.
continue. Yes.
Okay, so as I mentioned, in 1980, the horses were all moved to Shingletown. Today, the sanctuary is a 5,000-acre perimeter fenced property. The nonprofit owns about 2/3 of the property, and then we lease the other third from a neighboring landowner who is fine having the horses on his property. There are natural water sources on the property, and then over time, because of California drought conditions, we have been able to provide more. We've installed some, tapped into older wells and have installed some solar panels to help us power those wells. Everything we do at the sanctuary is done with the idea that the vast majority of funds that our donors give goes directly to the care of the horses and maintaining a safe environment for them. So today, as I said, it's a 5,000-acre perimeter fence property with a little bit of cross fencing to allow for rotation of pasture. We're trying to be more and more sustainable, and we've planted natural grass and again kept horses off a certain area, say 400 acres, for a period of time. Generally, then we can turn them out on that 400 acres and they eat for like a month, which means we don't need to feed them. In the early days of the Wild Horse Sanctuary, Wild Horse Annie was still around. And so Jim and Diane Clapp reached out to her and asked for some input and how do they get sponsors for these horses. And so she was instrumental in connecting the Wild Horse Sanctuary with people who were interested in helping fund sanctuary type operations. Oops. Sorry, you guys. So there's our sign at our main gate. Makes me so happy when I pull up and see that. And the sanctuary is open for tours. I'll mention that a little later in my presentation, but I'll go into that further later, but I did just want to throw that out there. So in the early years, Jim and Diane in particular, was very vocal and very involved in wild horse advocacy efforts. She would testify at legislative hearings. She would share information with anybody and everybody who asked, about how wild horses are coexisting on that land. She was really influential in a lot of ways, helping other sanctuaries in other parts of the country in the Western states get established. Um, they participated in rallies like at the California State Capitol in Sacramento. There was a lot of radio and newspaper coverage. And one of the most notable things is that the Wild Horse Sanctuary was the only place open-minded enough to say, we will participate in a study for this newly created reversible fertility control, the PZP vaccine that's being used on the Nevada range right now and on up to 50 different species as of last count throughout the world. That PZP vaccine was tested at the Wild Horse Sanctuary in the early 90s. UC Davis and the University of Ohio at Toledo, two scientists from those universities were they were in the forefront of this testing, and then there were other scientists that worked with them. At any rate, in the early days, they were looking at, is there a 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year vaccine? What's the sweet spot? What can we do? And it was at the Wild Horse Sanctuary that vaccine was tested. And now, like I said, it's being used worldwide. And in Nevada, in the Virginia Range area, is where there's that 82% reduction in birth rate. So the hope is that, as I stated earlier, that our government will look a little more closely at utilizing that as a means of humanely managing the horses and burros on the public land. Diane is such a positive person. She's still involved with the sanctuary. She's officially retired, but she lives on the property and we pick her brain all the time. And she's just an amazing source of knowledge. She does share that eventually she just got tired of fighting the same fight, beating a drum about how horses can coexist, only to have people like poo-poo that idea. And she said we were at rallies so frequently and we were doing testifying, and she said, I just decided to shift to something that I felt I could better influence, which was to invite people to come on the sanctuary, come and see these horses in their natural setting. Let's work to educate people and show people how things are and the beauty of the horses and the beauty of the landscape and all of the nature at the sanctuary. And so at that point, the people, Diane and the volunteers involved at that time, started leading 2 and 3 day trail rides on the property as one means of raising revenue, as well as exposing people to the beauty of wild horses and giving them an opportunity to ask questions. And then one of our philosophies is always to expose people and then point them to sources of information that we've found to be credible. So it's never that any one source of information is 100% accurate 100% of the time, but our goal is more to point people to, or encourage people to do some research on their own or get involved at whatever level they feel they can in wild horse advocacy, if that's even what they choose. Or if what they choose is to just come and have an amazing experience and then go on to do other things, that's, always fine too. Again, during that period of time, the sanctuary was getting a lot of radio and newspaper coverage because of the trail rides. It was kind of novel to have these gates being opened, and we were open at that point every Wednesday and Saturday all day. Just drop in. We had volunteers ready to take you out on a walk and talk about the horses themselves, the property, the history of the sanctuary. There was a lot of radio and newspaper coverage at that time. Huell Hauser even featured the sanctuary on one of his California Gold episodes. There was a gentleman, Rob on the Road. He'd go around to various places throughout the country, as would folks from America's Heartland. So there's quite a few television episodes of featuring the sanctuary. And then the other thing is to host more community events and the open house. So the sanctuary transitioned from being more of an advocate on a legislative front to more of a advocate as far as let's share this place with as many people as we can and let them make some decisions on their own, which is pretty much where we stand today. That's the philosophy has continued to be the case today. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to share some pictures of our horses. There was a time we had babies on the sanctuary. Um, a moment ago, I shared with you that we were the site of the test for the PZP vaccine in order to test fertility control, you need active stallions. The other thing that we were involved with is herd dynamics. There were a lot of research there were a number of research studies done on herd dynamics, both while babies were being born, and then a few people have come to do like their doctorate. I just lost the word when people are getting their PhD and they do their dissertation.
Yes, I was just going to say dissertation, but you found it. You got there.
Yes.
So, yeah.
On what happened after we ended reproduction. So, over time, it was decided that there were too many horses on in holding facilities. There were too many wild horses that needed homes. When we had babies born at the sanctuary, they were all placed for adoption from very early on. Any foal born at the sanctuary was placed for adoption, and at the time, no social media or this internet and things like that, but we used to have people come to our open house or our adoption events talking about horses that they had adopted over the years, bringing pictures. I used to run the adoption program for the sanctuary, and I would get people coming and showing me pictures of who they adopted 5 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. So it was easier to justify allowing reproduction on the sanctuary. But as I mentioned, over time, there were so many animals in need of homes, and weren't placing all of our babies all the time. So we began the project of eliminating reproduction, which was quite a chore because it's 5,000-acre perimeter fenced property, and we don't round them up on horseback or with machines. So it took us 6 full years to get every year we did a census anyway. We would use our feed trucks to kind of pull horses into like a 30-acre field, and then we would whittle it down in group by group using food to lure them into places and doing gate cuts and sorting. And it was usually took a couple of days to get everybody counted and any mare with a foal into a different area, and then get any foal that was a male in an area where it could be castrated. And so in 2023, we finally accomplished our goal where we no longer have stallions on the property and we no longer have horse babies being born. We partnered with another nonprofit organization that vets from around the world are part of a nonprofit where it's actually based out of Davis, California, but a nonprofit that came and did all of our castrations in the most recent years free of charge, which was awesome. And now we are currently working on completely eliminating burrow reproduction. We only had 6 burrow babies this year. And the difference between a burro and a donkey is there is none. It's just the name. In donkeys are donkeys, and the Spanish word is burro. And often when a donkey is wild, it is referred to as a burro. And so we do refer to them as burros at the Wild Horse Sanctuary. Um, so we have only had a handful of babies born last year. We think we are not going to have any more burro babies either, which really does allow us to take in older horses who don't have other options. And really that is our goal. So that's why you see babies in this picture. I do miss seeing the babies. They add a special something to the sanctuary and their antics and seeing them interact with their families. What we did learn is after we castrated all the male horses, there was some concern that the families wouldn't return, that if the two reunite as a family, because there was a thought by some inside the sanctuary on our board of directors, and some people who've been supporters or volunteers who were afraid that once the stallion was no longer a stallion, that the likelihood of them staying together as a family would be reduced. But we actually saw that there has been no change in family structure, and that once the stallions were castrated and then turned back out onto the property, they reunited with their mares, and they still, all live together as they had previously. These are 3 guys who hang out together all the time. I'm just sharing some photos so you can get an idea of the variety of horses we have at the sanctuary as far as shape and color and conformation. I already spoke quite a lot about what we're doing today. Our mission is to preserve and protect them, provide range sanctuary in an ecologically balanced environment where visitors are invited to come and for healing and to be inspired by the beauty of the nature around them. We work to increase the awareness of the value of America's wild horses. We've been a living replicable, it's always hard for me to say that, replicable model for how to manage horses on the range. And there are other sanctuaries now throughout the US who are doing very similar things to us, and over the years have contacted us for information and advice and encouragement. So where we are located in Northern California, there's deer, black bear, bobcat, wild turkey, fox, birds like you wouldn't believe, and everybody's coexisting. Yes, sometimes horses there are mountain lions, aka cougars, on the property, and sometimes the horses are hunted, and we do find remains on the property, which can be sad, but it's also all a part of nature, which is part of what I love about the sanctuary, is that we let them live as natural a life as possible without intervening unless an animal is suffering. So they live and die naturally on the sanctuary. We do believe that we have the obligation to end suffering in a horse that is suffering, and we do that. We have 2 different vets we use who drive the property with us on occasion, and we look at how the horses are doing. Sometimes the horses in our care, you'll find some that are quite slim. It's because they're older. We have a lot of older horses on the property, and they look old. Some of them look old, and if they're still living with their families and they're still moving with their families, we leave them be. And we let, nature take its course. Some are lame, some have wounds. We leave them alone and let nature take its course. And I've seen some really miraculous healing on the sanctuary, physical healing that I never would have thought possible if I didn't see it with my own eyes. Being a horse owner myself, when my horses have a wound, I'm out there scrubbing and putting some kind of salve. And I'm not saying that that's the wrong thing to do, but I'm saying that you can't do that with a wild horse. And yet many of them make significant recoveries from significant injuries, which is pretty amazing. We do collaborate with other organizations, other nonprofits. We take horses from the Virginia Range, which are managed by another nonprofit, Wild Horse Connection. We've taken horses from other sanctuaries where they've been, you know, one closed recently. They've been trying to close for the last 6 or 7 years because their founder passed and they didn't have anyone to take it on. We've taken over 20 horses from them. And although we do compete for donor dollars, I'm not going to lie, I mean, nonprofits who don't get any government funding are seeking donations to sustain themselves as being one of those organizations. There's never a competition for taking care of the horses. There's never anything that's gotten in the way of many organizations looking out for the well-being of the horses, which is something I'm also really proud about. So we're living our mission and achieving our goals through free wild horse viewing and docent-led walking tours. When we were in the COVID times, we did close our gates for a period of time. And then when we decided to reopen, we decided to do it by appointment. But so now rather than Wednesday or Saturday all day, anybody could call at any time and make arrangements for a tour. There are some days that we are open to the public, just gates open, but oftentimes now it's through appointment. We do have, instead of overnight trail rides, right now we have 2-hour lunch rides available, again, like by special arrangement. We've had interns from across the US and all around the world. We have had so many amazing people come. And interns, sometimes they're students and their time at the sanctuary counts toward college credit of some sort or some type of certification. Sometimes people are just coming to volunteer for a period of time without a specific tie to school. We have our annual open house every September. It's September 20th this year. So if any of you are in Northern California on September 20th, please come. We've hosted wild horse and burro gentling clinics as a means to place our babies into loving homes, getting them ready for a domestic life. We've had gentling clinics, and then we have a team of volunteers who have worked outside of the clinics to get the horses ready to be adopted. Equine assisted trauma focused therapy trainings. That's where I met Kathleen through her natural lifemanship work. I think maybe on 5 or 6 occasions, natural lifemanship came to partner with us to help mental health professionals learn the modality of training that natural lifemanship. I might be butchering this, Kathleen. I didn't mean to go off on this
No, you're doing great. No,
Okay.
that's exactly right. We're helping people learn how to do the equine therapy with
Yes.
the wild horses. That's right.
Yes. There have been a few other groups who've come in different capacities for even time just in the presence of the horses for regulation or just in general being within a natural setting where they can decompress, and they aren't working necessarily directly with the horses, but being in their presence. We've hosted a few photography clinics. Our calendar coming out for 2026 is the work that was donated by the photographers who came to our photography clinic in June of this year. So the calendar is being put together for next year with photos from a photography clinic, which was really kind of fun. We host team building and corporate retreats. We've done a couple of those, and we've done a couple women's retreats, school field trips. Scouts, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts have come to do service projects, and we've had other children's programs at the sanctuary as well. Insurance is a bear to navigate sometimes. So some of our ideas for how we would like to welcome people onto the property, we're still navigating through some of the insurance red tape, like programs with children and having the right people present and the background checks done and things like that. But we had a lot of local groups come, and especially homeschool programs with the schools has been really fun. Last year, we had to break down the camp that had for the 2 and 3 day trail rides. Guests would ride up the ridge and land at our wild horse camp, where they would be greeted with cold beverages after a 4 to 6 hour trail ride, um, refreshments, and then have dinner and breakfast the following day and stay overnight in our cabins. Last year, we ultimately decided to take down those cabins. Fire danger was one consideration. They were so remote that on occasion there would be squatters there or people vandalizing the property. And so we made the hard decision to disassemble camp with the vision that we would rebuild it in a more secure location, both for the wild horse viewing and for our guests. And that camp is done now. Um, we're just putting the finishing touches on it and are excited to offer tours of our new Frontier Village at open house. That'll be kind of our unveiling this year. And with that, we will be able to host even family type trips. If somebody wanted to come to the area for a vacation, we would be able to offer them a place to stay, tour the sanctuary, and then information about other sites to see in the area. So we're really excited about the new opportunities that are coming with our new camp.
Jill, just a heads up, we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay,
And we're loving all of this, but maybe choose the things you most want to share with us. And then
I'll go fast. I just wanted to share some photos that I find fun. Like, this is our open house. We have music and of wild horse viewing, and then even hands-on with some of the horses in our domestic herd. This is what the terrain looks like for people who come on a trail ride. Volunteer opportunities galore. We've had local Rotary clubs come to assist in various activities as far as firewood gathering, brush clearing and burning and such. Fence building and repair. We have, like I said, 5,000 acres perimeter fence. There's always need for repair and even some cross fencing. Here's our group, proud of our fencing. Feeding the wild horses, we do feed them 9 to 10 months out of the year, a ton to a ton and a half of food each day that we're feeding. This is our feed truck, and the horses love when they hear it fire up. They come to gather and get their breakfast. Oops. Again, feed.
With your feeding, is it y'all feed in a certain location so they know to come there, or are they?
We move it around to just kind of, when they are feeding in a certain area, there tends to be a lot of manure that ultimately gathers there. So we feed for a period in one area, and then we'll move, and then we'll drag the area that, has more manure and try to maintain, like, for parasite and fly control. They just hear the truck coming. I mean, they hear the truck and they find it. And now, although they are absolutely wild horses, they're a little bit like deer in a national park, where they get used to people. And so they don't always run, when they see a person. In the early days, they ran when they saw a person. Now they hear the truck fire up and they're like, we know what you're here for, and we love it. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So sometimes we feed in a line like this, but we do spread it out very far because we don't want anybody fighting over the food. So this is a winter feeding scene. Everybody's wet and muddy. This is oh, go ahead.
They all looked healthy.
They are. They're in really good shape. We have to feed to the middle. And that's something that not everybody understands, including myself, until I was around long enough. If you feed to the thin, the fatties are going to eat. it anyway. They will push the thin horses off. So then you're spending a ton of money on food and then you end up horses overweight, so feeding to the middle. And I'm sorry that I said the fatties. I'm thinking of a couple horses in particular who just follow the feed truck and they push everybody off. It's like me, me, me. I want it all. But I think you understand what I mean. Is
I
like,
think we've all known horses like that.
yeah, even in our domestic herds,
Yes.
we know horses like that. Um, we've got these burros were placed for adoption last year. 250 wild horses and about 45 burros currently on the property. But over the years, we've provided sanctuary to over 1,500 wild horses and burros. Um, the original came from the Modoc National Forest, the Devil's Garden area. We started taking in more herds from like the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, the Shoshone Indian Nation in Nevada, the Virginia Range in Nevada, places in Oregon and northern Nevada. And then, as I stated earlier, from other sanctuaries that needed additional help or were closing, for example. I mentioned we feed everybody 9 to 10 months of the year. We're completely donor. We rely on donor dollars completely. I mentioned that we don't have stallions anymore on the sanctuary. This is one girl who calls the sanctuary home. Her name's Magic. She's super cool and we love seeing her. She's not hard to miss. This gentleman is from the Calico Mountain Range. He's been quite a presence on the property. His name is Lightning. And then this is the kind of thing that just happens every day. Honestly, I'm not sure if these horses are playing or fighting because we see playing and fighting, which is just natural behavior. And then this is a group of youngsters who were available for adoption a few years ago. Most of them have been placed, and a few are living out the rest of their lives at the sanctuary since we ended our adoption program. They can go swimming. And this is one of my favorite photos. I threw it in for kicks because my friend took this picture. And like her timing was impeccable. The one in the back was chasing this one in the middle, and they just were chasing and chasing and chasing. And then she snapped this picture, which I thought was pretty fun.
Great timing.
So that is it.
I didn't realize you'd ended the adoption program. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, when we ended reproduction at the sanctuary, we did have horses still to place. And what we were finding is, well, we just kind of made a decision that there were some that were going to take a lot of work to get them ready for a domestic life. So we had some that you'd call easy, who wanted to be with the people, who loved being with people and getting them halter trained and able to be led and pick up their feet was easy and laced those. And then the ones that seemed more bothered by the human interaction are the ones that we had some thoughts that maybe if they got into their domestic home and their new person couldn't connect with them as quickly as they wanted to connect with them, if the horse wasn't for it, that maybe it just wouldn't be in the best interest of the horse. So those are the ones that didn't get placed. And then we had no more babies anyway. So we just said our adoption program has ended.
That makes sense. Thank you for
Yeah.
clarifying. 'Cause I know some of the people at our trainings were very excited to adopt their horses, and a lot of them are doing well. But that makes
Yes.
sense why. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Does anyone have questions for Jill? We've gone over a little bit, so if you need to sign
I'm
up.
sorry, you
No,
guys.
don't. No, it was great.
I didn't think I could talk for an hour.
No, it was fascinating information. I just didn't want anyone to feel that they had to stay if they need to go, but I just also wanted to make sure that no one else had questions before we wrap up.
Here, just a few more pictures. I told you I would share my sources. American Wild Horse Conservation is probably the largest and most organized wild horse advocacy effort on all fronts, legal, reproduction. Then the Bureau of Land Management, Wild Horse Education is a pretty, is a credible source. And then from my own experience at the Wild Horse Sanctuary, and the information that's available on our website is where I compiled the information I shared with you today.
Thank you so much, Jill. This has been wonderful. We've all learned so much, and I know personally that what you're doing at the Wild Horse Sanctuary is just phenomenal in terms of helping people connect with the horses and the situation and their right and need to live as naturally as possible.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
Thank you, Jill. And as I told you, I'd be the one with questions because I'm always asking something.
Yeah, good. You can visit our website. We have a info@wildhorsesanctuary.org if you want to come for a tour. If you want additional information about the sanctuary itself, you can visit our website, or call.
Okay.
Great.
All
Well,
right.
thank you so much. And then most of the people in the chat just said thank you and appreciate your work.
You're welcome. Have a good evening, you guys.
You too.